morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to episode, I think it's 168 of Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name is Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour, I'm going to be your ranter and raconteur, talking about things important to me I think are worthy of your attention. Any comments or reactions can be sent to me directly at whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com, or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. You can leave a comment there, or you can get the email from there too. If you do send me email, please include something in the subject line so I know it's not spam, and be a little patient. I'm a little slow about email, but you will get an answer. All right, we're going to start, as I always like to start whenever I possibly can, with some good news to get us going in the right way. The first thing is that even as the federal government continues to sputter and fume and stall on the issue of a raise in the minimum wage, states and localities continue to take the issue up. Latest is Chicago, where Mayor Rahm Emanuel has announced that he is endorsing a plan put together by a group of aldermen and labor and business leaders to raise the city's minimum wage to $13 an hour over the next 4 years, and after that to peg it to inflation. Unfortunately, it appears that the city council is not going to take this up in the immediate future, but still, it will come up at some point, and it is a step in the right direction. And by the way, the state minimum wage in Illinois is currently $8.25 an hour. All right, another area of good news, an area where there's been a whole lot of good news over the last several months, same-sex marriage. It has come to Colorado, at least in principle. In this case, though, this involves state courts, not federal courts. Earlier this month, a state judge for Adams County, Colorado, determined that a 2006 state constitutional amendment forbidding same-sex marriage violates the U.S. Constitution's guarantees of equal treatment and due process. Now, the ruling, as is common in these cases, was put on hold pending appeal. However, the next day, a federal judge refused to stop Boulder County, Colorado officials from issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples, which they had been doing since June 25th. In response to that ruling, the city of Denver started issuing same-sex marriage licenses. Unfortunately, to resolve this, the Colorado Supreme Court, state Supreme Court, stepped in and ordered the clerks to stop issuing such licenses on the grounds that while the appeals are still going on, the ban is technically still in effect, which is why I said that equality has come in principle to Colorado. The initial rulings are there, but the legal process still has to be played out. And by the way, it's important to remember all these things, these are stays pending appeal. These are not defeats. Meanwhile, diagonally across the country, last week, Luis Garcia, he's the Chief Circuit Judge of Monroe County, Florida, ordered the county clerk's office to start issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Now, that decision, too, was put on hold automatically in this case because the state attorney general announced an intention to appeal. However, supporters of same-sex marriage in the state called it, quote, the beginning of the end, unquote, of the state's ban on same-sex marriage. There are actually two other cases coming up which are challenging the state's ban. One of them would only affect, it's in state court, would only affect Miami-Dade County, but the other is in federal district court and would affect the entire state. Decisions on either or both of those cases are expected very shortly. Finally on this, remember when I said that the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a lower court decision that struck down Utah's ban on same-sex marriage, and I said that probably spelled doom for Oklahoma's ban because an appeal of a decision overturning that ban was on appeal to the same 10th Circuit. Well, bingo. Last week, the appeals court, 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, upheld that lower court decision, continuing the unbroken string of pro-marriage justice decisions we have seen in this country. All right, from there we can actually slide over very easily, right over into one of our occasional features. It's the Hero Award, which is given as the occasion arises to someone who just does the right thing on a matter big or small. On July 1st, Michael Lindsay, the president of Gordon College in Salem, Massachusetts, signed a letter sent to Barack Obama by several religious colleges demanding an exemption from federal regulations that outlaw anti-gay discrimination. In response, Salem Mayor Kimberly Driscoll terminated Gordon College's contract to operate the city's old town hall. In a letter to Lindsay that was posted on the city's website, Driscoll made it clear that the college's demand to be allowed to discriminate was the reason for the decision. "I am truly disappointed in the stance you have taken," she wrote, "which plainly discriminates against the rights of LGBT individuals both on and off campus. These actions fly in the face of the City of Salem's non-discrimination ordinance, which prohibits our municipality from contracting with entities that maintain discriminatory practices." So Kimberly Driscoll, that may, because of that, have seemed like an easy call, but I don't care. You're still a hero. All right, the quote up here, the quote you see up here, "I hasten to laugh at everything for fear of being obliged to weep," is attributed to Pierre Beaumarchais, is a French playwright, among other things. And here's a case of where this saying applies. Journalist Matthew Keyes submitted a Freedom of Information Act, an FOIA request, to the National Security Agency, the NSA, for emails sent by Edward Snowden from his NSA account in the months before he became a whistleblower. Snowden insists that before he decided to leak the documents that revealed the NSA's massive spying apparatus, he repeatedly raised concerns with superiors internally about the legality of the program. Well, in May, the NSA, after having initially denied that Snowden had raised any objections with anybody at any time about surveillance programs, released one single email from him in which he inquired about the relative power of executive orders and laws. The agency then claimed that this time, that really was everything. That really was all they had from him. Well, for his part, Snowden called that a clearly tailored and incomplete leak. So Matthew Keyes filed his FOIA request in order to let's see who's right. The NSA, of course, said no. They refused to release the emails, claiming exemptions under the Freedom of Information Act. Here's where it gets funny. Among the excuses the NSA offered, now remember, the NSA has already released one email from Snowden, one it thought it could use to buttress its case against him. Among the excuses the NSA offered was the claim that revealing any other emails, quote, would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Yes, you heard that right. The NSA is now deeply and touchingly concerned with personal privacy. Remember to laugh so you don't cry. All right, on from there we have two RIPs this week as more bits of my younger years slip away. First, legendary blues guitarist Johnny Winter died of natural causes at his hotel room in Zurich on July 17th. He was 70. He made his national debut at Woodstock in 1969 and spent the next 45 years as a proselytizer for the blues. In fact, he was on tour when he died. He was noted for the speed and intensity of his playing, and his fans among fellow guitarists included Carlos Santana, Eddie Van Halen, Michael Bloomfield, and Jimi Hendrix. So, R.I.P. Johnny Winter. And the other, well, I suppose it's possible that some of you may actually not have heard of Johnny Winter, but you do know this guy. James Garner died July 19th at the age of 86. He died of natural causes at his home in Los Angeles. Garner was probably best known to most people for his two big TV roles in the late 50s as Brett Maverick and in the late 70s as Jim Rockford. But he also made over 50 movies, including 1985's Murphy's Romance, which got him an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. And I suppose it says something that an appreciation of GarnerPeople.com said, quoting, while their grandparents remember him from Maverick and their parents remember him from Rockford, to millennials, Garner will always be Duke, the elderly version of Ryan Gosling's character in The Notebook. That movie was from 2004, 47 years after Maverick hit the small screen. So R.I.P. James Garner, I think you've earned it. And now to what may become a regular feature of the show. It's going to have so many regular features, I won't have time for anything else, but this may become a regular feature. It's the Factoid of the Week. It involves the program to create a fleet of F-35 Joint Strike Fighter jets. Now, this program is now 7 years behind schedule, and a couple of weeks ago, the fleet was grounded just before two air shows that were supposed to be the jets, if you will, coming out party. All right, here's your factoid. The entire cost of the program over the projected life of the jets is $400 billion. That amount of money could have provided a home worth over $600,000 to each and every homeless person in the United States. Or if you prefer it another way, all right, the yearly cost of the program is about $49 billion, 1 year. For that amount of money in a year, we could have covered the entire cost of the National School Lunch Program, which feeds approximately 31 million students every year, eliminated the cuts made in the food stamp program, paid our entire share of the United Nations 16 peacekeeping missions around the world, and paid the entire amount being raised by the UN Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs to address humanitarian crises around the world, including the millions of refugees and internally displaced persons in war zones, and we would still have a few $billion left over for dessert. All right, last before we take our break. A couple of decades ago, activists learned that class action suits were an effective way to pursue justice through the courts. People who could not afford to mount a legal challenge on their own could join with others in a similar situation and so have the means to take on a giant corporation or a government agency or whatever. So, of course, in more recent times, it's become harder and harder for anybody to do that. The requirements for being certified, that is recognized as a class, to be recognized by the courts as a class, those requirements have gotten stricter and stricter to the point where even a small difference among the individual circumstances of the members of the asserted class can result in no certification and the suit just not being able to go forward at all. And specifically in the area of civil rights, not only is it harder to get certified as such a class, it's also been made harder to prove you have been wronged, even if everyone knows you have been. Which brings us to the outrage of the week. On July 18th, the state Supreme Court of Iowa, in a 7-0 vote, rejected a class action suit that had alleged the executive branch of the state government of Iowa had discriminated against black job applicants. The court upheld a lower court decision to dismiss the case, finding that the 5,000 members of this class, the 5,000 black employees and job applicants, failed to prove that they suffered systemic discrimination because they did not show any specific hiring practices that disadvantaged them. At the same time, all 7 of these justices recognized the reality of implicit bias in which individuals basically just subconsciously favor whites over blacks. The main opinion, written by Justice Brent Apple and joined by 3 others, said that overt racism has been replaced by unconscious discrimination as, quote, the headwinds faced by African Americans in the employment marketplace. A separate concurring opinion from Justice Thomas Waterman and 2 others agreed the suit should be dismissed, even though, quote, there undoubtedly was subjectivity and, as the plaintiffs credibly demonstrated, implicit bias in multiple state hiring decisions. In fact, Waterman even noted that the original trial judge in the case said it appears that African Americans on the whole were disadvantaged in getting job interviews from some state agencies. Okay, this is where it gets outrageous, really. The plaintiff's case was based on statistical evidence that blacks receive fewer interviews and fewer jobs than whites at state agencies, plus a growing body of social science research affirming the concept of implicit bias. Their lawyer, Tom Newkirk, noted data, including some from state consultants and state experts, which suggested that blacks were generally disadvantaged in the job marketplace. Now, that sort of statistical evidence used to be enough to prove a claim of discrimination. It isn't anymore and hasn't been for a while. Instead, as the justices noted in their ruling, current state and federal law require the plaintiffs be able to point to and prove specific hiring practices were discriminatory. But of course, in the case of implicit bias, there is no such specific hiring practice because the discrimination rests in the unconscious mind of the interviewer or the hirer or the job agent or whoever it is making that decision. Newkirk said he knew the appeal was a long shot, but considered the ruling tremendously positive because of the recognition of implicit bias. Well, frankly, I think that's just trying to put a good face on a bad situation because I don't see how that's true. As current federal law stands, unless your employer puts out a memo saying something like, "We don't hire us no coloreds," you basically don't have a case for proving racial bias. And that is an outrage. And we are taking a break. And here we are back. You know, I have to tell you that there are times, there are moments, occasions, periods in my life when I have trouble dealing with things. And I don't mean, you know, things. I mean things. Not the me stuff, not the my life stuff, not the getting up, going to work, doing the errands, mowing the lawn, washing the car, walking the dogs, reading a book, going, you know, whatever. Not all that stuff. No. It's the whole world stuff. Sometimes the awareness penetrates the cynicism, the emotion penetrates the intellectualizing, the reality penetrates the analysis, the whole penetrates the parts. At times like that, I have an expression: the world is too much with me. Now, I'm not sure if I came with that expression or I came across it somewhere, because it actually originally was from a sonnet written by William Wordsworth in 1802. And that sonnet starts, "The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours." So I don't know if I actually came up with that on my own or I came across it somewhere, but in any event, that's what it is. The world is too much with me. It's that moment when you are too aware of the enormity of the pain and suffering in the world and how small and pointless anything you or I can do about it just seems overwhelming. It's not a good place to be. It can be, if it goes on too long, it can be absolutely debilitating. I was finding the world too much with me recently. What actually triggered it was noticing a news story about two rival Libyan militias fighting for control of the Tripoli airport, and another about a battle between the Libyan army and Islamic forces in Benghazi. And it reminded me that since the fall of Gaddafi, the fighting in Libya has never actually stopped. There is near anarchy in parts of Libya. There's a civil war in Ukraine. There's a civil war in Iraq. There is civil war in Syria. And of course, there is now butchery in Gaza. And it was too much. I wanted to hide. I still do. But I can't hide, at least not yet, because there is something I have to say. Israel does not want peace. I don't know how else to say it except that bluntly and that directly and that harshly. Israel prefers the status quo. Israel prefers having Hamas as an excuse to avoid a final settlement. Israel prefers the occasional Hamas rocket, which actually rarely did any kind of harm at all. It prefers that to no rockets at all. It prefers to drive the people of Gaza into the arms of Hamas, prefers that rather than doing anything that would undermine the popularity of Hamas, such as lifting the blockade of Gaza, which has turned the region into the world's largest outdoor prison. Why? Because real peace would mean a real Palestinian state, and that would require the hard right of Israel to give up its dreams of a greater Israel, a nation standing astride the Middle East with the power and reach of King David and all of his glory and all the most grandiose tellings of all of the tales. It would mean treating Palestinians as equals and regarding themselves as just one among equals. And for far too many on the Jewish right, the politically powerful Israeli right, the politically powerful conservative religious right in Israel, that just cannot be allowed. But the thing is, Israel can't do this. It can't maintain this without the support of the United States. The United States is now actually paying about 25% of Israel's annual defense budget, annual military budget. So we have to be flooded with Israeli propaganda which depends for its success on Americans knowing little about Gaza and ignorance driven in turn by the heavy pro-Israel bias of the U.S. media, a bias so extreme that on July 21st, MSNBC contributor Rula Jibrial accused her own network of being, she said, disgustingly biased, saying that the network might have on a Palestinian, quoting her, maybe for 30 seconds, and then you have 25 minutes for Bibi Netanyahu and half an hour for Naftali Bennett. Benjamin, nicknamed Bibi Netanyahu, is the Prime Minister of Israel. Bennett is the Minister of the Economy. And as if to prove her point, Jibril later said on Twitter that her upcoming TV appearances had been canceled. You want an example of how that ignorance works? All right, I'll give you one. How many times in the past several days have you heard it said that Israel blames the hundreds of civilian deaths, including the over 150 children, the thousands of civilian casualties from its attack on Gaza? How many times have you heard Israel blame that on Hamas, on claims that Hamas is using civilians as human shields? How many times have you heard it claim that Israel is doing everything it can to not harm a single civilian? In fact, on Monday, Netanyahu said the Palestinians, quoting, are responsible for all the civilian deaths because, he said, they don't care, they just want to pile up the bodies. All right, here's where the ignorance comes in. The population of Gaza is about 1.8 million. The area of Gaza is about 140 square miles. That's about 12,900 people per square mile. The population density of the city of Boston, 12,900 people per square mile. Gaza is as densely populated as the city of Boston. And remember, the people of Gaza can't leave. They are blocked in on one side by the Egyptians and the other side by the Israelis. So you tell me, where are those civilians supposed to go? Where are they supposed to go where they cannot be targeted by Israeli bombs? Look at this leaflet. This is a leaflet, the text of a leaflet that Israel dropped on Gaza before the bombing, okay? The other thing here that's easy to forget, and damn well because the U.S. media never mentions it, and Israel will consciously avoid mentioning it, is that Hamas is not just a military organization. It is the elected civil leadership of Gaza. It's not just the military, it's the schools, it's the police force, it's the fire protection, it's daycare centers, it's hospitals. Where do those people go in Gaza to avoid anything that can be called Hamas? Israel knows this. It knows these people have nowhere to go. The Israeli government knows, it cannot not know, that its attacks will indiscriminately kill civilians. It knows, and it doesn't care. We know it doesn't care because it keeps doing it. It keeps doing what it knows will indiscriminately kill civilians, and then lies, blatantly lies, about whose fault it is. It knows, and it doesn't care. What it cares about is that we do not know. But we have to be aware. We have to learn. We have to know. And one of the things we do know, we have to know it now, is that it is time, in fact, it is long past time, for a complete end to all U.S. military aid to Israel, all aid, assistance, and sales. Not one plane, not one gun, not one bullet, not $1. Not until Israel formally, overtly, and specifically recognizes the Palestinians' right to an independent state in the West Bank and Gaza and reaches an actual agreement to that end. And I do mean formally and specifically. None of the maybe, sure, someday, kind of, in some form, yup, sort of double talk that has been the Israeli government's policy until now. Especially since we now know that policy is a complete lie. At a press conference on July 11th, Netanyahu made it explicitly clear that he would never agree to a fully sovereign Palestinian state in the West Bank. Quoting, "There cannot be a situation under any agreement in which we relinquish security control of the territory west of the River Jordan." At that same press conference, Netanyahu also said, in the combination of inflamed self-importance and paranoia that increasingly marks Israeli government policy, that he sees Israel as standing alone on the front lines against Islamic radicalism, while the rest of the as yet free world does its best to not notice what's going on. Well, okay. If the leadership of Israel likes to see their nation as standing alone, maybe we should allow them to do just that. Until there is an actual settlement, including an independent Palestinian state, which any real settlement will have to include, not one U.S. penny should go to the Israeli military. We may not be able to stay the hangman's noose, but we can at least stop paying for the rope. All right, last thing for today. I should have enough time for this. We just have time now for the Clown Award, which is given, as always, for meritorious stupidity. The big red nose this week goes to the Republican members of the House of Representatives. Now, there were some Democrats involved here, but 90% of them were Republicans, so they get the award. Despite a 2008 Supreme Court decision striking down its ban on owning handguns, Washington, D.C. still has some of the toughest gun control laws around. Residents must register their handguns every 3 years. They have to complete a safety course, and they have to be fingerprinted and photographed. Meanwhile, in March, the city, Washington, D.C., decriminalized possession of less than 1 ounce of pot, replacing criminal penalties for simple possession with a fine of $25, which is one of the lowest around. All right, last week, the GOPper-controlled House of Representatives approved a spending bill that would undo both of those laws. Now, bear in mind, Congress has the final say over the laws and budget of the District of Columbia. Now, what this means, that if the House GOPpers get their way and these provisions survive the rest of the budget process, it will be, in Washington, D.C., it will be a crime to walk around with a joint in your pocket, but entirely legal to walk the streets with a loaded .45. What more can be said? Each and every one of them. Clowns. All right, that's actually everything I have this week, so I will tell you that I'm taking a week off. I'm actually going to take a week off. Yes, I know, how can you possibly survive without me? But I am going to take a week off. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with the show. But for now, for the moment, I'm just going to tell you that, again, if you have any reactions to the show, please, I do invite reactions. Gushing a few praise is the most fun, but not necessarily the most useful. But again, whoviating@AOL.com. Feel free to contact me. But for the moment, you just try to have the best week you possibly can. Peace.